folks, HR Funk here, out on a cold and windy November day here in Ohio. In fact, today is November 10th of 2018, so it's the Marine Corps birthday. Happy birthday to all my fellow Marines out there, both current and former, Semper Fi. And if you're wondering why I'm starting this video sitting in my Jeep, that was not my plan, but the wind is blowing so hard outside here on the range that I'm getting virtually no useful audio. So rather than try to take video and have everyone wonder what I was saying when I'm done, I decided to record this part of it in here where you can actually hear me. Then I'll go out and do some shooting. Now, if you saw my last video, you already know that I'm evaluating the Kel-Tec Sub2000 as a possible response option in an active shooter incident. And if you didn't see part 1 of this video, go back and watch that ahead of time before you watch this one, because it'll help put everything that I'm doing into perspective. What I'm going to do in just a couple of minutes is start to shoot the Sub2000, and the first shooting that I'm going to do is over the Chronograph, and I'm going to compare the velocity that I'm getting from the 16-inch barrel of the Sub2000 to the 4¼ barrel of my M&P pistol that I'm pairing it with. Now, a couple of things have happened in the last week since I made the first video. First off, I did go out and do some shooting with the Sub2000. In fact, a couple of days ago, I qualified with it on a law enforcement qualification course, the same course that I've featured in a couple of past videos. So if you've seen those videos, you know the course that I qualified on. I did not touch the sights. I didn't do anything to the Sub2000. I just took it out and shot it and didn't have any problem qualifying on that course. Now, as I've said before, that's not the most demanding qualification course you're ever going to find anywhere, but it is the one that's mandated here in Ohio. So at this point, I am qualified with the Sub2000 to use in the performance of my duties. The other thing that I did prior to shooting it is I changed out the magazine catch that was in the Sub2000 to begin with. When I first got it, it was set up to use the magazines from a Beretta pistol, specifically a Beretta 96, and I got the M&P magazine catch from Kel-Tec, had them send it to me. I think it was $12.50 plus $3 or $4 for shipping, and I installed that in the Sub2000. It now works with M&P magazines, and that's what I shot it with the other day, and that's what I'm going to be shooting it with today. Now, a couple of things I noticed in shooting the Sub2000 for the first time is, first off, it's a nice shooting little carbine. As I said, I didn't touch the sights at all, and I didn't have any problem qualifying with it. There are a couple of little quirks with it, though. One of them is, for me at least, and I think this varies from shooter to shooter, I have a difficult time getting my cheek low enough on the receiver tube, and I'll try to keep from putting a hole in my roof, low enough on the receiver tube to be able to see well through the rear sight. And as I'm trying to do that and I'm crunching my cheek down on there, it gets a little uncomfortable. It feels a little bit like each time you fire the Sub2000, you're getting whacked on the cheekbone with a metal pipe, which essentially you are. So I did order a rubber sleeve to go on there when that comes in, and I got a taller rear sight to go on. So when I get those items, I'm going to install those and do a future video to let you know how those do. Now, none of that shooting that I did or none of the discomfort that I experienced was enough to prevent me from shooting accurately or keep me from qualifying with the Sub2000. But it is something that even a couple of days later, I can still feel that part of my cheek is a little bit sore. So I think that's something to keep in mind with a Sub2000. Now, this is not a carbine that I'm going to grab and go out for an afternoon of pleasure shooting. This is something that I have for a very specific purpose. This is a tool to be able to use as a response option in an active threat incident, and I'll shoot it enough to stay proficient with it, but it's not something that I'm going to put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds through in a fairly short period of time. So I think that discomfort factor is probably something that I'm not going to worry too much about, other than, like I said, I'm going to put the rubber sleeve on it. Once I start to actually shoot through some of the defensive drills with the Sub2000, I'm going to do sort of a mixture of some of the drills that you see me do with a handgun and then some of the more carbine-specific drills that you've seen in some of those other videos. The reason I'm doing that is because I tend to think of the Sub2000, particularly since it's a pistol caliber carbine, as an extended range handgun with a greater hit probability under stress. I'm thinking of this as basically a 50 yards and closer system, especially since I'm not going to have an optic on it. I'm going to be leaving the iron sights on and using those. This is not an extended range option. This is not a replacement for an AR. And by the way, I mentioned this in the first video, and I want to say this again. If I had my choice in an active threat incident, I would be using some sort of, probably an AR, in a centerfire rifle cartridge. But because of the Sub-2000's ability to be so portable in a 16¼ inch package that weighs 4.5 pounds, it really affords that shoulder fire response option and the benefits of the shoulder fire response option in a package that's much easily portable even than the AR style pistols that are out there. Again, go back and watch my first video and I explain all my rationale behind that. So I'm going to get out and brave the weather here in a little bit and start to do some shooting. Hopefully you'll be able to hear some of the things that I'm saying when I'm shooting at the chronograph and when I'm shooting on some of the targets coming up. But I'm probably going to keep my talking to a minimum because, as I said, trying to get useful audio out there is very difficult. And I'm set up and ready to go for the chronograph test. The ammunition that I'm going to be using today is going to be Speer 165 grain gold dot ammunition. I'm going to start out firing it through my M&P pistol with a 4¼ inch barrel. Now that ammunition is rated by Speer as having a velocity of 1150 feet per second from a 4-inch barrel, so we'll see how close it gets to that with the M&P. Then I'll switch over and we'll see what kind of velocity we get through the Sub-2000. Also, while I'm doing the velocity test on the Sub-2000, I'm going to be shooting it on a bullseye target just because I want to see exactly where those sights are hitting from the factory. Now, as I said before, I didn't have any problem qualifying with it the other day, but I do want to see if those sights need any tweaking at all just to make sure they are absolutely precisely on. So here we go. Let's see what kind of chronograph results we get. And looking at the tail of the chronograph, we have some pretty consistent velocities there. A low of 1144 feet per second, high of 1163, average 1156, right where Speer said that it should be. So now I'll switch over and we'll see how the Sub-2000 does with that same ammunition. And there's 10 with the Sub-2000.
And here are the results from the Sub-2000 when we crunch the numbers. Low was 1,376 feet per second. High was 1,422. Average is 1,398. So we're picking up about 250 feet per second out of that 16-inch barrel. And average velocity is right about 1,400 feet per second. Folks, the accuracy that I'm getting with the Sub-2000, if I can get it to focus here, is looking pretty good. That's from 20 yards while I was shooting over the chronograph, and everything is nicely centered. I'm not sure how big that 10-shot group is, but it's not so big that it causes me any concern. So I don't think I'm going to have to touch the sights one bit.
Okay folks, next up is a simple 50-foot accuracy test with the Sub-2000. This is similar to what you see me do with handguns when I bring them out for an evaluation, and I'm expecting it to be a little bit easier with a shoulder fire platform. We'll see how it goes. Also, I'm going to start to use something else I got this past week. This is a ProMag 25 round extended M&P magazine that works in both the M&P pistol and the Sub-2000. I shot it the other day during my rifle qualification, so I'm going to try it out here today and we'll see how it goes in this test.
Folks, not only was that easy to keep those shots center chest at that shot tempo from 50 feet, it was fun. It felt like the Kel-Tec Sub-2000 stayed on target by itself, and all I had to do was press the trigger.
And next up, we'll try a couple of failure drills from 20 feet.
And there were 3 failure drills in a row, and the body shots are in the body, the head shots are in the head, and no problem whatsoever keeping everything where it belonged with the Sub-2000.
By the way, folks, I didn't mention it before, but I'm now running CCI Blazer brass ammo in the Sub-2000, starting with the 50-foot drill and now on the failure drill that I just finished, and I still haven't reloaded since I started the 50-foot drill. And next up for the Sub-2000 is going to be the multiple adversary drill from 20 feet. We'll see how it does on this one.
The multiple adversary drill doesn't get much easier than that, folks. Quick shots, they're all nicely centered. I'm going to turn this one target that's over here so you can see those shots a little bit better.
Again, very nicely centered there. And that really was not much more than just point firing on that drill. Folks, as I said before, I'm envisioning the Sub-2000 as a system for 50 yards and closer. In this next drill, I'm going to try an engagement from 40 yards, and we'll see how it does from there.
And they're still staying in the chest from 40 yards. Again, this little carbine continues to impress.
Okay folks, it's time to introduce the Sub-2000 to the water bottle desperados. We'll see how they like this. And being the cowardly villains that they are, one of the water bottle desperados again made a break for it, but didn't get far. Folks, I decided to finish up today's video here in the shop so you would actually be able to hear me over the wind noise. At this point, between the shooting that I did today and the shooting that I did last week when I qualified with the Sub-2000, I have about 150 rounds through it, give or take. And at this point, I have a few thoughts on the design and actually some things that I wouldn't mind seeing Kel-Tec change if they come out with a Sub-2000 version 3. The first thing is the safety. The safety on the Sub-2000 is a simple cross-bolt safety. Now it does have a guard to keep it from being inadvertently activated. But I would like to see that change to something similar to an AR safety. And the only reason for that is for those of us who have run ARs for years and years and years and have a lot of muscle memory, I would like to have that same familiar safety to be able to activate and deactivate as I'm deploying the Sub-2000. Minor point, but just something I wouldn't mind seeing in the future. Also, I would like to see a last round bolt hold open. Currently, when you fire the last round from the magazine, the bolt cycles just like it does when there's still ammunition left in the magazine, and you really don't get anything to indicate to you that you've just fired the last round. And especially if I'm firing the extended magazine with 25 rounds, I'm firing, and all of a sudden I get a click instead of a bang, and that's the only indication that I now have an empty Sub-2000. Hand in hand with those changes, the rear sight really needs to be raised a little bit. It's not a bad sight for shooting, and as you saw out on the range, I really didn't have any problem firing the Sub-2000 accurately, but trying to acquire that sight picture with the sight as low as it is on the receiver is a little bit of a challenge. If they would raise that just slightly, then it would be a natural sight picture, and it would be very similar to bringing an AR up to your eye line and being able to line it up with the target. I like the sights in general, and they have that AR type familiarity for those of us, just like I was saying with the safety, that have years and years and years worth of muscle memory in that. But again, that rear sight needs to be just a little bit higher. And probably the last thing that I would like to see is that rubber sleeve on the receiver tube here. Now, Kel-Tec actually sells that item, and you can order it from them and install it yourself, but it would be nice if you had it as a factory option already installed. With that and the higher sight, I think you would have that very comfortable shooting platform that would make the Sub-2000 just a little bit easier and a little bit more enjoyable to shoot. Now, one criticism that I've seen of the Sub-2000 that I really didn't think bore out in my shooting of it is with the trigger. The trigger is a little bit quirky. It almost feels like a two-stage trigger. And first off, no magazine, no round in the chamber. But the Sub-2000 trigger, as you squeeze it, you feel a hesitation, and as you press past that, it moves, and you saw that right there. And let me reset it. So you squeeze it, you feel it stop, and you squeeze past, and then you feel it stop again, and that's the final stage before the trigger actually breaks. I fired a lot of two-stage triggers in my match rifles, and I guess for me, that feels kind of natural because I squeeze it past that first stop to the second break, or the second stop rather, and once I press past that, I know the Sub-2000 is going to fire. So I think the trigger really is mostly just a matter of getting used to it. It's really not that bad. It's not that heavy. I've seen people complain about the trigger being heavy, and it's not. In fact, let's take a quick look at it on the trigger pull scale and see exactly where the Sub-2000 trigger is breaking. And at this point, I have the Lyman trigger pull scale all fired up and ready to go. Let's see where this trigger is breaking. Just over 7 pounds. 7 pounds, 3.7 ounces. Let's try it one more time. 7 pounds, 6.7 ounces. So between 7 and 7.5 pounds, which is about where your GI AR trigger breaks, although without the stagey feel that the Sub-2000 has. With regard to the reliability of the Sub-2000, it has been extremely good. In fact, in all the shooting that I've done with it, which is upwards of 150 rounds now, I've had exactly one malfunction. It was a failure to feed, and it was a malfunction that I induced. Now, in my defense, I did it on purpose because I wanted to see if the Sub-2000 was susceptible to this kind of malfunction, and it is. The malfunction occurred with my extended magazine, and when I was shooting the qualification course, the last stage involves shooting from a prone position. So I had inserted the extended magazine, and when I dropped into the prone position, I purposely rested the base of the magazine on the ground. The reason I did that is because I've seen other firearms that use an extended magazine that when you do that, rest the magazine on the ground or on some other object if you're not in a prone position yourself, the firearm will, or the magazine rather, will rock slightly inside the magazine well, and I think it's because the extended magazines have a little bit more leverage, and it will change the attitude of that top round of ammunition in the column and cause it to fail to feed properly into the chamber. And that's exactly what happened with the Sub-2000. I dropped down onto the ground, I rested the magazine base plate on the ground, and when I fired that first round, the first round fired and the bolt cycled, and when that happened, the second round failed to feed properly into the chamber. So I got up, I cleared the malfunction, I reloaded, and I shot that stage again without resting the magazine base plate on the ground, and the Sub-2000 ran fine, and it has run fine ever since. So the lesson from that is if you're using an extended magazine in your Sub-2000, don't rest it on the ground or on any other kind of object while you're shooting it. Other than that, it has run perfectly fine. And I have shot aluminum case blazer ammunition through this, which in the previous version of the Sub-2000 was not recommended, but it ran fine in this. I ran 50 rounds of that through it the other day. I've run the blazer brass ammunition that I had out on the range today, and also the Spear gold dyed ammunition. And other than that one malfunction that I caused, it has run 100%. Here's some interesting data I was able to glean from that chronograph information I got at the range with the Sub-2000. Now you may recall that 165 grain Spear gold dot bullet had a muzzle velocity of 1,400 feet per second, or an average muzzle velocity of 1,400 feet per second. That translates to a muzzle energy of 730 foot-pounds. That's a lot of steam. In fact, at 50 yards, that same bullet still has a retained energy of 570 foot-pounds. That's almost exactly the same as a 125 grain 357 Magnum bullet out of a 4-inch revolver point blank. So 50 yards down range, we've still got that much punch. Now, paper ballistics are not everything when it comes to terminal performance, but one of the big things that I see with this is if you have to overcome some sort of an intermediate barrier, door, window, or whatever, the 40 Smith & Wesson bullet still has a lot more energy to punch through that and still hopefully resolve the situation than you would have with something else. That was really why I wanted to go with the 40 Smith & Wesson version of the Sub-2000. There's one more point I'd like to make before I wrap things up today, and that is if you've gotten the idea through watching this video or the one that I did last week that I'm suggesting someone should intervene in an active threat incident, that's not the case. A lot of the information that's been presented here and in the previous video is for persons like myself that have been trained for that type of intervention. And along those lines, if other persons such as myself have watched the information I presented and reassessed their own preparations and either determined that they want to add a shoulder fire platform to enhance their capabilities, or if they've looked at what they have and decided that's adequate for them to be able to use, that's fine too. And if they disagree with the selection of the Sub-2000 and they think there's something else that would be better for them to be able to use, that's fine too. But if I've at least been the catalyst to provoke a little bit of thought and some added planning and preparation for the good guys, I'm happy to have done so, because just this week, again, we've seen another tragedy. There's probably going to be at least one more video in this series because I'm still evaluating carry methods for the Sub-2000, and I also want to get those modifications installed that I mentioned earlier in the video. So when I get that done and when I select the carry method that I'm going to ultimately be using, I'll be back in front of the camera and I'll let you all know what that is. So that's the video for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those below. And as always, until next time, good shooting. Bye-bye.